The land we call Cambodia is a cradle of memory, older than empires, older than writing itself. Beneath the soil lie tools shaped by hands thousands upon thousands of years ago. In caves near Battambang, faint rock paintings whisper of hunters, of spirit dances, of animals that once roamed freely. Archaeologists uncover pottery shards decorated with delicate incisions, proof that even in the deep past, beauty was woven into utility. Bronze drums, green with age, once beat rhythms across river valleys, and in burial jars and sacred mounds, ancestors rested, adorned with beads of stone and shells carried from far-off shores. The Mekong River flows endlessly, its waters nourishing life as it did millennia ago. Imagine the earliest communities building their villages upon its banks, weaving bamboo shelters, tending fires that flickered in the humid night. Rice was already known to them, grains sprouting in wet paddies, bound forever to the rhythm of the monsoon rains. Slowly, carefully, they learned to bend water to their needs, to guide streams, to flood fields at the right time. With each harvest, they began to understand that stability could be theirs, that a people might root themselves in this fertile earth. From the mist of prehistory emerged the ancestors of the Khmer. They were never isolated. Even in those ancient centuries, trade brought distant worlds together. Beads from India, bronze work from China, ornaments from the seas of Southeast Asia all found their way into Cambodian soil. Every artifact tells a story of movement, of connection, of a people already belonging to something larger. It was here that the seeds of kingdoms would be sown. By the first centuries of the Common Era, whispers of the earliest states appear in Chinese chronicles. They speak of Funan, a land of waterways, merchants, and kings. Ships carved with dragon prows sailed along the coasts, bringing spices, ivory, and silk. The Chinese envoys described markets filled with goods and rulers who traced their power to divine origins. Legend tells of an Indian Brahmin, Kondinya, who married a local queen named Soma, binding foreign knowledge with native strength. Whether legend or memory, it reflects a truth that Cambodia stood at the meeting point of worlds, absorbing ideas, faiths, and technologies. The people of Funan built cities that thrived along canals and rivers. Imagine long wooden bridges crossing waterways, warehouses storing spices, scribes copying texts in scripts from India. Buddhism and Hinduism arrived, carried by monks and traders. Shrines to Vishnu and Shiva rose beside stupas, holding relics of the Buddha. The people did not abandon their older spirits of forests and rivers. Instead, the old and new blended, weaving a spiritual fabric that would endure for centuries. As centuries passed, Funan gave way to Chenla, a collection of highland and lowland polities. Chenla's kings expanded inland, raising sanctuaries on hilltops and plains. Stone replaced wood, and inscriptions in Sanskrit began to appear, carved deeply into steles that stand even today. They speak of kings and their lineages, of offerings to gods, of victories over rivals. The tone is solemn, grand, timeless. But alongside these royal words, life went on quietly. Farmers bending over their paddies, potters shaping clay, children splashing in rivers, monks chanting by candlelight. In these centuries, the land became dotted with sanctuaries, some hidden in jungles, others crowning mountain ridges. They were places where the divine was invited to dwell, where the earth and heavens met. Step by step, stone by stone, the cultural identity of the Khmer deepened. Soon, out of this tapestry of Chenla would rise something greater, something that would leave behind the world's largest temple and a capital so vast it stunned all who beheld it. The age of Angkor was drawing near, though the night still held its silence. And so, as you rest, we pause here with Cambodia standing at the threshold of empire. Its rivers carrying the echoes of chants and its forests waiting patiently for the grandeur to come. The empire's heart soon shifted to a place called Angkor, nestled near the Great Sap Lake. This lake was no ordinary body of water. It breathed with the seasons, swelling in the rains until its waters stretched wide, then receding in the dry months to reveal fertile plains. The Khmer learned to harmonize with its rhythm, constructing an elaborate web of canals, reservoirs, and embankments. These berets, vast artificial lakes, shimmered like mirrors under the sun, capturing monsoon rains and feeding fields of rice. The system was so advanced that it could sustain hundreds of thousands, even millions, with grain harvests that allowed cities and temples to flourish. Life in Angkor thrummed like a pulse. Imagine wide avenues shaded by towering sugar palms, ox-drawn carts creaking with rice, markets where silk from China, gems from India, and aromatic resins from Cambodia's own forests were exchanged. The air would be thick with incense drifting from temples, with the sound of bronze bells marking rituals. Priests recited Sanskrit hymns, while artisans carved sandstone with astonishing delicacy, chiseling out gods, dancers, and kings who seemed to breathe within the stone itself. At the empire's center stood temples that were more than temples. They were mandalas, sacred representations of the universe in miniature, aligning earth with sky, man with gods. Among the earliest great projects was the Temple of Bakhong, with its tiered pyramid form reaching skyward. Later came Bafun, Priya Khan, Ta Promich, one a story in stone, dedicated to Shiva, Vishnu, or the Buddha, depending on the age and the ruler's faith. Then, in the 12th century, under Suryavarman II, rose the most celebrated jewel, Angkor Wat. Imagine the soft glow of dawn as you stand before its silhouette, the 5 lotus-shaped towers piercing the morning mist. Its galleries stretch endlessly, walls etched with bas-reliefs that tell epics of gods and warriors, of heavens and hells. The rhythmic sound of chisels striking stone once echoed through decades as thousands of laborers, sculptors, and monks brought the vision to life. Angkor Wat was not merely a temple, it was the cosmos itself rendered in sandstone, a mountain of the gods surrounded by the ocean of the moat. But life in the Khmer Empire was not only monumental. It was also intimate, lived in wooden homes on stilts by riversides. Families tended cattle, wove textiles, brewed rice wine. Children played in the dust, their laughter mingling with the rustle of banana leaves. Dancers trained in the royal courts, their movements flowing like water, their golden costumes catching firelight at dusk. Music of gongs, drums, and flutes filled the air during festivals when the city rejoiced under lanterns. The empire was a living organism, grand yet tender, cosmic yet human. Khmer kings ruled as divine monarchs embodying Devaraja, the god-king cult. Statues of Shiva or Vishnu were placed in temple sanctuaries, not only as deities, but as reflections of the ruler himself. The king's presence was both earthly and celestial, a bridge between the people and the divine. Through this belief, loyalty was cultivated and unity preserved across vast territories. The empire stretched far, embracing much of what is now Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. Armies marched across jungles, carrying spears and bows, elephants adorned with armor, banners fluttering. Yet, conquest was only part of their strength. The Khmer were masters of adaptation, blending Indian philosophies with local traditions, reshaping them into something uniquely Khmer. They wrote inscriptions in Sanskrit and Old Khmer, blending worlds of thought. They worshipped Hindu gods, yet revered ancestral spirits. They built monuments of eternity, yet lived amidst rice fields and water buffalo. By the time of Angkor's height, it was one of the largest cities on earth. Scholars believe nearly 1 million people lived there, far greater than many European capitals of the same era. Imagine approaching it then. Causeways lined with balustrades of stone serpents, moats wide as rivers, gates guarded by colossal faces carved in sandstone. Foreign travelers from China and beyond described its splendor in awed tones, marveling at the sheer scale of its irrigation works and temples that seemed endless. The nights in Angkor must have been otherworldly. The air filled with the hum of cicadas, the scent of lotus ponds mingling with cooking fires. Stars reflected upon the berets, while chants from monasteries rose like threads of sound into the sky. The empire was alive, vast, powerful, and radiant, yet also fragile, bound to the cycle of time, like all things. As you breathe softly now, drifting deeper into rest, picture Angkor at its golden height, a city of stone and water, of devotion and artistry, a wonder carved into the very heart of Southeast Asia. The story flows on. But tonight, in this moment, the Khmer Empire gleams in its full glory. The lotus towers of Angkor, watching silently over a world that seemed eternal. Jayavarman VII came to power in the late 12th century, a time of upheaval. The rival kingdom of Kampa had invaded Angkor, even burning parts of the city. Out of this crisis, Jayavarman rose. He fought back with determination, driving the Kham from Khmer lands, and once his throne was secure, he turned to a new vision of kingship, one steeped in Mahayana Buddhism. For centuries, Hindu deities had dominated the empire's temples, but Jayavarman VII filled the land with serene Buddhas, with faces of compassion carved upon stone towers, gazing calmly in all four directions. His most iconic creation was the Bayon Temple, rising at the very heart of Angkor Thom, the walled royal city. Picture yourself walking beneath its massive gateways, where colossal stone faces smile with tranquil mystery. They are neither fully divine nor fully human, but something in between, a symbol of the union of king and Buddha, earthly power and spiritual grace. Within Bayon's galleries, endless bas-reliefs stretch across the walls, markets bustling with sellers of fish and rice, naval battles against the Kham, dancers in ritual procession, ordinary lives carved alongside the extraordinary. Few empires have so vividly recorded not just their myths, but the daily breath of their people. Beyond Bayon, Jayavarman VII built Ta Prohm, a temple dedicated to his mother, and Priyakan for his father. Unlike the neat grandeur of Angkor, Wat Ta Prohm was left in semi-wildness, its corridors embraced by silk cotton trees and strangler figs. Even in his own time, perhaps it already felt like a merging of human effort and the forest's eternal patience. Today, its walls, wrapped in roots, are some of the most haunting images of Cambodia's past. But Jayavarman's vision extended beyond temples. He sought to embody the Bodhisattva ideal, ruler who ruled for the suffering of others. He ordered the construction of hospitals, rest houses along roads, reservoirs to feed the people. Travelers could stop at these houses and be given food, a gesture of hospitality written in stone inscriptions. His reign was a rare blend of might and mercy, and it left the Khmer Empire at a spiritual and cultural height. Yet, even in its brilliance, shadows were forming. The empire's scale, its constant building of temples, and its monumental irrigation works placed heavy demands on its people. The Great Berets, once lifelines of water, required endless maintenance. A slight imbalance, too much rain, too little rain, could unravel the delicate rhythm. Modern studies suggest that periods of drought, followed by catastrophic floods, strained Angkor's system. The canals clogged with silt, reservoirs cracked, and the very lifeblood of the empire began to falter. At the same time, new rivals pressed at the borders. The Siamese kingdom of Ayutthaya rose in the west, steadily growing in strength. To the east, Vietnamese powers encroached. The Khmer armies, once dominant, were now drawn into wars that sapped energy and weakened unity. Even within the empire, shifts in religion sowed subtle divisions. While Jaivarman, the seventh Buddhism, had flourished, later kings turned back to Hinduism, then back again to Theravada Buddhism. Each transition left behind unfinished temples, altered sanctuaries, gods replaced, images defaced. The stone still stood, but faith itself seemed unsettled. By the 14th century, the empire was no longer the unchallenged giant it had been. Angkor remained magnificent, but its lifelines, the water, the trade routes, the morale of its people were fraying. Foreign visitors noted a city still vast, yet perhaps quieter, its energy dimming. And then came the wars with Ayutthaya, the Siamese, who would eventually storm Angkor. In 1431, the great city was sacked. Its people, weary and fragmented, began to abandon the colossal stone capital. The jungle crept inward. Temples fell silent. Monks moved south. Kings relocated their palaces closer to the Mekong and Phnom Penh. Imagine Angkor then, towers still piercing the sky, carvings still alive with myth, but galleries empty, pools, still corridors echoing only with the cries of birds. Slowly, vines reached down like fingers. Moss spread across statues. Roots split the walls. The empire that had once fed millions, that had mapped the heavens onto earth, slipped into memory. Yet Angkor was never truly lost. Pilgrims still visited. Monks still lit incense at Angkor Wat, which remained a sacred temple through the centuries. The people never forgot their heritage. Though kings moved south, though wars and hardships pressed upon Cambodia, the legacy of Angkor lingered, waiting for the day the world would remember. As you breathe calmly now, picture the quiet twilight after the fall, when the jungle reclaimed what was left behind. The rustling of leaves softened the sounds of empire. The mighty Khmer capital once the heartbeat of a million souls, became a sleeping city, held in the embrace of roots and vines, resting like you tonight, resting but not gone. After the fall of Angkor in the 15th century, Cambodia entered a long twilight, neither vanished nor thriving, but shifting, surviving, and waiting. The kings no longer ruled from Angkor's vast stone city. Instead, the capital moved south, closer to the life-giving Mekong, two regions where trade with the outside world might sustain what irrigation no longer could. Places like Lavec and later Phnom Penh became royal seats, more modest than Angkor, but alive with people, monks, markets, and the hum of riverboats gliding along the currents. The new Cambodia was different from the empire of stone. Wooden palaces rose, lighter and less eternal than the temples of Angkor, but suited to the shifting times. Theravada Buddhism became the spiritual foundation of the land, its simplicity resonating with the people. Monks in saffron robes walked barefoot through villages, bowls in hand, as farmers placed rice within them each dawn. Temples, or wats, appeared in every community, their roofs curving gracefully, their interiors painted with murals of the Buddha's life and the Jataka tales. Religion was no longer the grand monument of a king alone. It was the shared rhythm of daily life, woven into villages and families. Yet Cambodia was caught between powerful neighbors. To the west, the kingdom of Ayutthaya in Siam grew ever stronger. To the east, Vietnam's expansion pressed forward. Cambodia's kings often found themselves in precarious balance, paying tribute to one side or the other, sometimes to both. Armies marched through the land, and wars were fought not to expand, but to survive. Villages burned, rebuilt, and burned again. Still, the Cambodian spirit endured. Rice fields continued to ripple with the monsoon winds. Festivals brightened the darkness as families lit lanterns along rivers during Bon Om Tuk, the water festival celebrating the great reversal of the Sap-S current. At such times, joy returned, the laughter of children running with paper lanterns, the splash of oars in boat races, the sound of drums echoing across the water. Even in hardship, these traditions bound the people together. Foreign travelers sometimes passed through this Cambodia, writing of its beauty and its struggles. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Portuguese, Spanish, and later Dutch visitors noted the resilience of a people whose great stone capital lay hidden in the forest. They heard tales of the lost city, of towers overgrown by trees, but few believed such wonders still existed. For locals, Angkor was never lost, but for the outside world, it faded into legend. By the 17th century, Cambodia's sovereignty was fragile. Siamese and Vietnamese armies frequently intervened, installing or deposing kings. The royal court at Lavec fell to Siam in 1594. And though capitals shifted afterward, Cambodia's independence was always precarious. Still, its cultural life did not vanish. Dance, music, and art continue to flourish, passed down through generations. The graceful Apsara dance, born in Angkor's courts, was still performed in palaces and festivals, its gestures carrying whispers of the empire's golden age. Life for the ordinary Cambodian remained tied to the land. Villagers rose at dawn, their hands submerged in water as they planted rice seedlings, their backs bent beneath the sun. Children fished with woven baskets in streams. Women spun silk, dyed it in bright colors, and wove intricate patterns. In the evenings, stories were told by firelight folk tales of clever animals, of spirits that dwelled in trees and rivers, of the Buddha's compassion guiding the way. Through all these centuries, Cambodia's kings dreamed of restoring greatness, but power was rarely theirs to command. The shadow of stronger neighbors loomed large. Yet what endured was identity itself. The Khmer language, the Buddhist faith, the festivals, the memory of Angkor's stones. The people held to these things like a flame cupped in the palms, fragile yet unextinguished. And then, in the 19th century, a new presence appeared upon Cambodia's horizon, one from far across the seas. European powers, hungry for colonies, turned their gaze upon Southeast Asia. France, already established in neighboring Vietnam, looked toward Cambodia. To some, French protection seemed salvation from Siam and Vietnam's encroachment. To others, it was simply the arrival of another master. In 1863, under King Norodom, Cambodia became a French protectorate. The old independence slipped quietly away, replaced by treaties and colonial officials. Yet with the French came also a rediscovery. Scholars, archaeologists, and explorers began to seek out the hidden ruins of Angkor. When Frenchmen like Henry Mouat described the temples to the wider world, astonishment followed. Suddenly, the forgotten capital was no longer myth. Its stone towers, long embraced by trees, rose again in the imagination of the globe. Picture the scene: French explorers, their notebooks filled with sketches, stepping through shadowed corridors where roots hung like curtains, brushing aside vines to reveal vast bas-reliefs. For them, it was a revelation. For Cambodians, it was a reminder of what they had always known, that their ancestors had created wonders unmatched, and that beneath hardship, greatness still slept in the stones. Thus, Cambodia entered a new age, no longer the mighty empire of Angkor, not yet the modern nation we know today, but a land poised between memory and change, caught in the tides of colonialism and the awakening of old glories. And so, as you rest, imagine Cambodia at this turning point its people living simple lives in villages. Monks chanting at dawn, French scholars brushing dust from carvings in the jungle. The past and future met there in that quiet moment before the modern world would sweep across the land. When the French came to Cambodia, they brought with them not only administrators and soldiers, but also scholars and missionaries. They saw in Cambodia not just a colony to be governed, but a treasure of civilization to be studied and shown to the world. So they cleared vines from the temples, mapped out Angkor, and documented its sculptures. And in 1907, they returned 3 Cambodian provinces to the kingdom, bringing Angkor Wat back home. For the Cambodian people, life under colonial rule was a paradox. In the villages, life went on as it always had. But above those rhythms, new currents flowed. French schools taught a small elite to read and write in the language of Paris. Catholic churches rose in some towns, and new forms of taxation pressed heavily on the peasants. Phnom Penh, the colonial capital, grew into a city of wide boulevards and French villas with balconies of wrought iron. The French invested little in schools for Cambodians, but they poured energy into the study of Angkor. Can you hear the chisels carefully removing centuries of roots from the temple walls? The slow sweep of brushes uncovering ancient carvings. The scratching of pens across field notebooks by lamplight. These scholars brought Angkor into books and photographs that traveled far beyond Southeast Asia, astonishing the world with visions of towers rising from the jungle. Few tourists arrived in those early years, but those who did came by riverboat or caravan. They stepped into temples that seemed frozen in time and marveled at the intricate details. The year was 1953, and after nearly 90 years under the shadow of the French, Cambodia at last breathed the air of freedom again. The world was changing. Colonial empires were crumbling. Nations across Asia were rising with new independence. And Cambodia, too, would take its place among them. At the heart of this transformation was King Norodom Sihanouk, whose youthful face and charismatic presence embodied the new Cambodia. Sihanouk had ascended the throne during the Second World War, chosen because the French believed his youth would make him easy to guide. But he surprised them. Behind his gentle smile was determination. He played the game of diplomacy with skill balancing France, Japan, and later the United States, since he declared Cambodia's full independence. On November 9th, 1953, it was a bloodless independence, achieved through negotiation rather than revolution, and for many Cambodians, it was like the dawn of a new day. In the years that followed, Phnom Penh became a city alive with optimism. Wide boulevards bustled with bicycles, rickshaws, and new automobiles. Cinema halls glowed at night, playing both French films and Khmer productions. Radios carried music across the airwaves, melodies of pinpeat orchestras mingling with Western jazz. Cambodia was stepping into modernity with grace, yet still holding to its traditions. Sihanouk soon abdicated the throne to his father, King Norodom Sora Merit, so that he could rule more directly through politics. He formed the Sungkum Reister Nyamda, People's Socialist Community, which became the vehicle of his leadership. To many, Sihanouk was not just a politician, but a guardian of culture. He promoted education, encouraged Khmer cinema, and even directed films himself, often starring in them. Schools opened, roads were built, and festivals flourished with renewed vigor. Religion, too, thrived. Monks filled monasteries, their chants rolling like waves through dawn air. Pilgrimages to Angkor became symbols of national pride as Cambodians looked upon the ancient temples not as relics of a forgotten empire, but as living symbols of their identity. Angkor Wat's towers appeared on the national flag, a reminder that Cambodia's greatness was eternal, even as the nation embraced modern times. Yet, beneath the golden surface, shadows lingered. The world outside Cambodia was gripped by the Cold War. In neighboring Vietnam, war ignited between communist and anti-communist forces, and the conflict spilled across borders. Sihanouk sought to keep Cambodia neutral, balancing between East and West, refusing to let his land become another battlefield. But neutrality was fragile. Aid came from both sides: American investment on one hand, Chinese and Soviet support on the other. Each step in this delicate dance carried risks. Inside Cambodia, discontent slowly brewed. Not everyone embraced Sihanouk's rule. Some criticized his suppression of political opposition, his blending of monarchy with personal power. In the countryside, whispers grew louder of revolutionary ideas of communism, of resistance. Among those who listened closely to such ideas was a quiet, studious man named Salath Sar, who would later be known as Pol Pot. He and others studied abroad, absorbing radical ideologies, and when they returned, they began to imagine a Cambodia transformed in darker ways. But for now, in the 1950s and early 1960s, Cambodia still glowed with a fragile light. Foreign visitors described Phnom Penh as a city of charm, its riverside alive with its markets overflowing with fruits, mangoes, rambutan, coconut, fragrant herbs. Dancers in gilded costumes performed the Apsara dance before visiting dignitaries, their fingers curling gracefully like the petals of a lotus. The National Museum displayed ancient statues linking modern citizens to their Angkorian ancestors. For a time, Cambodia seemed to move in harmony between past and future. Then, in 1970, the balance shattered. While Sihanouk was abroad, his own general, La Nol, seized power in a coup, declaring the Khmer Republic. Suddenly, neutrality was gone. The war in Vietnam spilled violently into Cambodia as American bombers rained fire upon border regions to strike communist sanctuaries. Villages were torn apart, fields scorched, families displaced. The countryside grew restless with anger, and many began to see in the revolutionary Khmer Rouge not merely radicals, but defenders against the foreign bombs. Sihanouk, once the beloved leader, was cast into exile. From abroad, he allied himself with the very communists who had once opposed him, urging peasants to join their struggle against Long Nol's republic. The land was caught in a spiral, torn between factions, foreign powers, and ideologies. The gentle optimism of the 1950s faded, replaced by fear and uncertainty. Yet still, amidst the turmoil, ordinary life tried to endure. Farmers planted rice where they could. Monks recited sutras for peace. Children played by riversides, even as the rumble of distant bombs rolled across the horizon. The spirit of Cambodia persisted, clinging to tradition, to family, to the hope that one day the storms would pass. But darker days were coming, days when the Khmer Rouge would seize the capital, when cities would empty, when silence would fall heavier than ever before. We rest in this uneasy twilight, 1960s slipping into the 1970s. Cambodia, caught between memory and catastrophe, its fate trembling on the edge. As your breath slows tonight, imagine that fragile Cambodia streets alive with music, yet skies trembling with distant thunder. A nation dreaming of peace, yet drifting slowly, inexorably, towards shadow. The year was 1975, and Cambodia stood at the edge of transformation. For years, war had battered the land bombings on the borders, fighting between the Khmer Republic and communist insurgents. Fields lay abandoned, rivers ran quiet with fear, and whole villages carried scars of displacement. Then, in April, the long-simmering conflict reached its end. Columns of black-clad soldiers, the Khmer Rouge, entered Phnom Penh. Crowds at first greeted them with relief, thinking the war was finally over. They hoped for peace, but the peace that followed was unlike any they had imagined. Almost immediately, the city was emptied. Through loudspeakers, the new rulers ordered all citizens to leave Phnom Penh. Families walked for miles under the blazing sun, carrying what little they could. Hospitals were cleared, patients forced from beds. Marketplaces were silenced. A capital once full of music, laughter, and bustle became a ghost city. Across the land, urban centers emptied, millions driven into the countryside. The Khmer Rouge called this the beginning of Year Zero. To them, Cambodia was to be reborn, stripped of its past, remade as a purely agrarian society. Money was abolished, schools closed, religion suppressed. Cities were abandoned, and every Cambodian was turned into a laborer, forced into the rice fields. Under the hot sun and heavy rains, men, women, and children worked long hours with little rest and meager food. Hunger gnawed at bellies. Exhaustion dimmed spirits. The ideology was severe. No personal property, no individual identity, only the collective. Families were often separated, sent to different communes. Marriage itself became a matter of state arrangement. Old tradition songs, rituals, festivals were silenced, their beauty seen as distraction. Even the wearing of traditional silk garments or ornaments could bring suspicion. The Khmer Rouge sought to erase history itself, to cut ties to both the colonial era and the glories of Angkor, leaving only their stark vision of equality through suffering. But beneath that vision lay brutality. Anyone suspected of disloyalty, of foreign influence, of education or intellectual thought was at risk. Teachers, monks, doctors, even those who simply wore glasses or spoke a foreign language could be accused. They were taken to prisons such as Tul Slang in Phnom Penh, where interrogation and torture awaited. From there, many were transported to fields on the outskirts, places that later came to be called the killing fields. There, under the watch of the regime, countless lives ended, their voices silenced beneath the soil. It is said that nearly 2 million Cambodians perished during those years from execution, starvation, disease, overwork. Whole villages were emptied, ancient traditions severed, songs and stories lost. The land itself seemed to mourn, rice paddies overworked and forests cut back, while silence replaced the music of festivals. And yet, even in this darkness, humanity flickered faintly. Families whispered prayers in secret. Monks continued to meditate quietly, though robes had been stripped away, and neighbors shared scraps of food when possible. In the stillness of nights, under starlit skies, people remembered the Cambodia that once was markets glowing with lanterns, temples alive with chants, rivers flowing with boats of celebration. Memory itself became resistance, a quiet act of survival. By 1978, Cambodia was weary, hollowed by famine and fear. But beyond its eastern border, tensions rose. The Khmer Rouge had turned hostile toward Vietnam, launching raids across the frontier. In December of that year, Vietnam invaded, sweeping across Cambodia. By early 1979, Phnom Penh fell once again, this time to Vietnamese forces. The Khmer Rouge retreated into the jungles, leaving behind a country broken and traumatized. In the capital, survivors emerged from the emptiness. Slowly, people returned from the fields to the city, where silence still lingered. Streets were overgrown, homes abandoned, institutions shattered. Families searched for loved ones, often in vain. Children wandered, thin and weary, carrying stories too heavy for their age. Cambodia, once the jewel of Southeast Asia, now faced the immense task of rebuilding from ashes. And so, the years of the Khmer Rouge came to an end, but their shadow lingered. The land itself felt haunted fields, carrying the weight of bones. Cities echoing with absences. Songs half remembered. Yet, as history always shows, even in the darkest moments, the spirit of Cambodia endured. The same spirit that built Angkor, that resisted foreign rule, that celebrated life with music and dance, had not been destroyed. It lay waiting, fragile but alive, ready to rise again when the time came. As you rest now, imagine the Cambodia of the late 1970s, not in its quiet resilience. A land battered yet unbroken, people weary yet holding to memory, temples still standing against the sky. The night is long, but dawn is always near. The dawn of 1979 brought both relief and uncertainty. With the fall of the Khmer Rouge, the fields of forced labor were left behind, and the dark silence of emptied cities slowly gave way to cautious footsteps. People began returning to Phnom Penh, once abandoned and ghost-like. They walked through streets overgrown with weeds, homes broken by neglect, and buildings hollowed by absence. Schools stood silent, chalkboards blank, desks overturned. Monasteries lay deserted, statues damaged, their calm faces gazing still at the ruins. Yet, even in that devastation, life began to return. Families carried bundles of belongings into the city, hoping to find shelter. Children played again in the rubble, their laughter fragile but real. Vendors set up small stalls, selling whatever little they could find: dried fish, rice, herbs. The capital, wounded though it was, began to breathe again. The new government, supported by Vietnam, called itself the People's Republic of Kampuchea. It promised stability, rebuilding, and a return to normal life. But recovery was slow. The Khmer Rouge, though driven from power, still controlled parts of the countryside, launching guerrilla attacks from the jungles. Beyond Cambodia's borders, many nations refused to recognize the new government, seeing it as a puppet of Vietnam. Instead, the Khmer Rouge still held Cambodia's seat at the United Nations. A bitter twist for survivors who had endured their rule. In refugee camps along the Thai border, hundreds of thousands of Cambodians sought safety, their lives caught between war and exile. Aid groups arrived carrying food, medicine, blankets. Slowly, the outside world began to see Cambodia not as a distant battlefield, but as a place of immense suffering and resilience. Inside the country, rebuilding was slow but steady. Schools reopened, teachers trained once more, though often with little more than pencils and scrap paper. Monks returned to monasteries, their saffron robes bright against the gray of broken cities. The chants of sutras rose again in temple courtyards, carrying comfort to those who mourned. Music returned, too, at weddings, festivals, and markets. The haunting melodies of the tra, the plucked strings of the chapi, the graceful movements of apsara, dancers all, slowly reawakened from silence. The 1980s were marked by hardship, but also quiet determination. Food remained scarce, medicine limited, and the shadow of war lingered in rural areas. Yet in villages, neighbors helped one another, planting rice together, rebuilding homes with bamboo and palm leaves. Children learned from elders, not only in classrooms, but through stories tales of Angkor, of heroes and spirits, of resilience passed from generation to generation. By the late 1980s, winds of change swept across the world. Vietnam, weary of conflict, began withdrawing its troops from Cambodia. International negotiations gathered pace as the great powers sought peace. It was not easy. Factions still fought. The Khmer Rouge refused to surrender, and distrust ran deep. But in 1991, a historic step was taken: the Paris Peace Agreements. For the first time in decades, a vision of peace seemed within reach. The agreements brought the United Nations into Cambodia, tasked with organizing free elections and overseeing transition. Soldiers from across the world arrived, wearing blue helmets, patrolling streets, and standing guard at polling stations. For many Cambodians, it was a surreal sight: foreigners speaking many languages, working to bring order to their homeland. In 1993, under the watchful eye of the UN, millions of Cambodians voted in the nation's first free elections in decades. Lines of people stretched through villages, waiting patiently to cast ballots. Fingers were dipped in ink as proof of their vote, and when results were announced, a new government emerged. Norodom Sihanouk returned as king, his role symbolic but deeply cherished, a figure of continuity linking past and present. The 1990s brought a fragile rebirth. Phnom Penh stirred with new life. Markets reopened, schools filled with students. Pagodas resounded with chants once more. International aid flowed in, helping rebuild hospitals, roads, and institutions. The world watched as Cambodia, long scarred by war, slowly healed. Yet, not all wounds closed easily. The Khmer Rouge, though weakened, continued to fight in remote areas. Through the 1990s, skirmishes flared in jungles, and fear lingered in villages near their bases. Only toward the end of the decade did the movement finally collapse, its leaders scattering, some eventually brought to justice in later tribunals. Still, amidst these struggles, Cambodia's cultural spirit blossomed again. Traditional arts were revived, dancers teaching younger generations the Apsara steps once outlawed, musicians carving instruments, artisans crafting silk and silver. Ancient temples, long neglected, were cleared of vines, restored stone by stone, their carvings glowing once again in sunlight. By the end of the century, Cambodia had survived the unimaginable and found its way back to the world. The resilience of its people, tested through centuries, had carried it forward once again. And so, as the 20th century closed, Cambodia stood fragile, but hopefully, nation scarred, yet still singing, still dancing, still dreaming. The weight of its past was heavy, but the whisper of renewal stirred in the air, like a lotus blooming from muddy waters. As you rest tonight, picture Cambodia of the 1990s lanterns glowing in markets, children laughing in classrooms, monks walking barefoot through villages at dawn, and ancient towers rising against the pink sky. Out of silence, life was returning. Out of darkness, light was growing again. The new millennium arrived, and with it, Cambodia entered a fresh chapter. In memories carried silently by survivors, but alongside them, the pulse of renewal grew stronger. Children born after the conflicts filled classrooms, their eyes bright with possibility. Too young to remember the darkest years, but old enough to carry the hope of their families. In Phnom Penh, the streets filled once again with noise and movement. Motorbikes buzzed through boulevards. Markets overflowed with color baskets of dragon fruit, chilies, and fragrant lemongrass piled high under canvas awnings. Opened along the riverside, their terraces facing the slow currents of the Sap and the Mekong. The city, once emptied of life, now thrummed with energy, a mixture of tradition and modernity. Temples remained the heart of daily life. At dawn, monks walked barefoot through narrow streets, their alms bowls shining faintly in the morning light. Families placed rice and fruit into their hands, offering prayers for health and good fortune. In courtyards, saffron robes fluttered in the breeze. Children played between old stupas, their laughter mingling with the low murmur of chanting. Tourism also returned. Travelers from across the world came to see Angkor Wat, its sandstone towers glowing gold at sunrise. Paths once overgrown were cleared, revealing bas-reliefs of celestial dancers and epic battles carved centuries ago. At Ta Prohm, giant trees with roots like serpents still wrapped around ancient stones. A reminder that nature and history entwined endlessly. Visitors walked in silence, touched by the mystery of these ruins, while local guides told stories of kings, gods, and legends. Economically, Cambodia began to change. Factories rose along the outskirts of cities, producing garments that traveled across oceans. Construction sites filled Phnom Penh with cranes and scaffolding as hotels, banks, and office buildings grew where once only emptiness lay. Villages, too, felt the shift, roads paved, schools built, markets expanded. The hum of radios gave way to the glow of televisions, and later to the quiet tap of mobile phones and internet. Yet, amid this growth, challenges persisted. Poverty remained widespread, particularly in rural areas where most Cambodians still lived. Farmers worked tirelessly in rice paddies, bent beneath the sun, depending on rains that sometimes failed. Families balanced between tradition and modern opportunity, sending children to school but also relying on their help in the fields. The divide between city and countryside remained wide, a reminder that recovery was uneven. Politically, stability was carefully maintained under strong, sometimes rigid leadership. The country embraced peace, but voices calling for openness and democracy were often restrained. Still, compared to the storms of the past, the calm of the present was cherished. For most Cambodians, what mattered most was that the gunfire had ceased, that markets were open, that children could grow without fear. Culturally, a renaissance blossomed. Artists, dancers, and musicians, many once silenced, now found space again to create. The Royal Ballet of Cambodia, nearly lost under the Khmer Rouge, was revived, with shimmering Apsara dancers gracing stages at home and abroad. Filmmakers, writers, and painters began telling stories, long suppressed tales of survival, memory, and identity. Museums displayed relics of Angkor alongside exhibits of modern art, bridging ancient and new. The early 21st century also brought Cambodia closer to the wider world. Membership in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, opened doors to regional cooperation. Foreign investment grew, visitors arrived in ever greater numbers, and Cambodia found itself connected to global flows of trade, culture, and technology. Yet, the past was never far away. Trials were held in Phnom Penh to judge the crimes of the Khmer Rouge, bringing long-awaited justice to survivors. Old leaders sat in court, frail with age, while testimony revealed once more the depths of suffering. For many Cambodians, the trials were painful but necessary, a way of ensuring that memory would not vanish, that the silence of victims would not be forgotten. Nature, too, remained part of Cambodia's story. The vast waters of the Sap Lake continued their ancient rhythm, swelling in the rainy season, receding in the dry, nurturing one of the world's richest ecosystems. Fishermen cast nets at dawn, pulling in glistening fish. Floating villages drifted gently upon the water, houses rising and falling with the changing seasons. Forests still echoed with the calls of gibbons and hornbills, though logging and development threatened their sanctuaries. The land was both beautiful and fragile, a reminder of the delicate balance between growth and preservation. By the 2010s and into the present, Cambodia's cities grew ever more modern. Skyscrapers began to rise in Phnom Penh, neon lights glowing at night, rooftop buzzing with young people. Yet, just beyond, in the countryside, oxen still pulled wooden carts, and farmers tended rice by hand, much as their ancestors had for centuries. Old and new coexisted, intertwined like the roots of trees around Angkor stones. And through it all, the spirit of Cambodia endured. A spirit of resilience, of patience, of joy in small things, a bowl of steaming noodle soup, a shared festival. The beauty of lotus flowers floating on still ponds. Despite every hardship, Cambodians laughed, loved, and dreamed, carrying their culture forward into the new century. As you rest now, picture this Cambodia of today, temple towers rising against the dawn. Children riding bicycles down dusty lanes, rivers glimmering with sunlight, and cities glowing with promise. It is a nation that has endured the depths of history, yet still greets the future with quiet strength.